Hey there, beautiful souls. Welcome back to Soul Igniting Story, where love, passion, and unforgettable moments come alive. Today, we got a heart-melting tale that will sweep you off your feet. Let's dive right in. Have you ever wondered what happens when a millionaire CEO comes face to face with the children he denied at birth? When Jalen, Amara, and Nia walked into that Atlanta charity gala on a warm September evening, they weren't just three successful young adults making an entrance. They were walking, breathing proof that greatness can bloom even when planted in rejection soil. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. Have you ever discovered a family secret that changed everything you thought you knew about yourself or someone you loved? Drop a comment below and let me know, because what you're about to hear will make you question how well we really know the people closest to us. And if this story moves you, hit that like button right now. Theodore Bainbridge stood across that glittering ballroom, champagne glass in hand, completely unaware that his past was about to collide with his present in the most devastating way possible. Here was a man who had built an empire from nothing. Bainbridge Technologies, a software giant worth over $2 billion. He was the kind of CEO who graced magazine covers, the kind of success story that business schools taught case studies about. But success is a way of hiding our deepest failures, doesn't it? 23 years earlier, Theodore had made a choice that would haunt him every single day since. A choice so morally bankrupt that it defied everything he claimed to stand for. When his wife Olivia gave birth to triplets, beautiful, healthy babies who happened to be biracial, Theodore did the unthinkable. He denied them, publicly, completely, as if they had never existed. Those three babies he abandoned? They were now Dr. Jalen Bainbridge, the youngest neuroscientist ever to receive tenure at Emory University. Amara Bainbridge, who had just broken 3 NCAA records and was using her platform to fight for racial equity in athletics. And Nia Bainbridge, whose art exhibitions exploring biracial identity were drawing crowds from New York to Los Angeles. They had kept his name, even though he had thrown theirs away. Jalen had spent his childhood asking questions his adoptive mother Angela couldn't answer. Why didn't our father want us? Became, how can I use my mind to heal others? His research on brain injury rehabilitation was saving lives across the country, but the wound of paternal rejection still throbbed beneath his professional success. Amara channeled her pain differently. Every sprint, every hurdle, every victory lap was her way of proving that abandoned children could still soar. When reporters asked about her motivation, she'd smile and say, I run for everyone who was told they weren't good enough. She never mentioned the father who had decided she wasn't good enough before she could even walk. Nia painted her truth onto canvas after canvas. Her series, Invisible Fathers, had critics calling her the voice of a generation. Each piece told the story of biracial children navigating a world that often demanded they choose a side, while the people who created them refused to choose them at all. But none of this magnificent growth would have been possible without one woman's courage in that delivery room 23 years ago. Marissa Keene wasn't just a midwife. She was a guardian angel in scrubs. When she witnessed Theodore's rejection of his own children, when she saw the fear and prejudice cloud his judgment, she made a decision that would change everything. Marissa didn't just deliver those babies. She delivered them from a fate of abandonment and neglect. Working with her friend Angela Devereux, a community leader who ran programs for biracial families, Marissa ensured those children would grow up surrounded by love, purpose, and the truth about their worth. Now, as Theodore mingled with Atlanta's philanthropic elite at his own company's charity event, ironically focused on racial reconciliation education, he had no idea that the 3 most important people he'd ever denied were walking straight toward him. The triplets hadn't come for revenge. They had come for something far more powerful, the truth. After years of wondering, months of private investigation, and weeks of building courage, they were finally ready to face the man who gave them life and then pretended they didn't exist. What happens when rejection meets resilience? When denial confronts undeniable success? When a father's worst decision comes face to face with his children's greatest achievements? The answer begins in the most unlikely place, a delivery room in South Atlanta, where one July morning changed the course of 5 lives forever. And the woman who made it all possible was just trying to do her job. Bring new life safely into the world. Make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because what happens next will challenge everything you think you know about family forgiveness and what it really means to be a father. This story is just getting started. To understand how 3 abandoned babies became the accomplished adults who would eventually confront their father, we need to go back to where it all began, back to an Atlanta that was thriving in the early 2000s, where 2 completely different worlds existed just miles apart, yet might as well have been on different planets. Theodore Bainbridge's world occupied the 32nd floor of a gleaming downtown tower. At 35, he was already being called a visionary. Bainbridge Technologies had started in his garage just 8 years earlier, a classic American success story of late nights, maxed out credit cards, and one breakthrough software solution that changed everything. The company's flagship product revolutionized how hospitals manage patient data, and Theodore had turned that single innovation into a tech empire. By 2001, Bainbridge Technologies employed over 3,000 people and was expanding into international markets. Theodore wasn't just wealthy, he was influential, sitting on boards, advising politicians, and shaping the future of healthcare technology. But money and power couldn't erase the programming of his upbringing. Theodore came from old Georgia money, the kind of family where Confederate portraits still hung in dining rooms and conversations about the way things used to be happen over Sunday dinner. His father, Nathaniel Bainbridge, had built the family's first fortune in textiles and had very specific ideas about bloodlines, heritage, and what made a family respectable. Growing up, Theodore heard the stories about great-great-grandfather who lost everything after the Civil War, about the importance of preserving the family legacy, about how certain relationships could complicate a man's standing in society. These weren't presented as lessons in hatred. They were packaged as lessons in practical wisdom and protecting what matters. Theodore thought he had moved beyond all that. He donated to civil rights organizations. He hired diverse talent at his company. He genuinely believed he was different from his father's generation. But believing you've changed and actually changing are 2 very different things, as he was about to discover in the most painful way possible. His wife Olivia came from similar stock, blonde, beautiful, from a family whose wealth traced back to railroad money. They had married young, and for 7 years, Olivia had struggled with fertility issues. Multiple miscarriages had left them both heartbroken and desperate for children. When Olivia finally became pregnant with triplets, it felt like a miracle. Theodore threw himself into preparing for fatherhood with the same intensity he brought to business deals. He converted an entire floor of their Buckhead mansion into a nursery suite. He interviewed pediatricians like he was hiring executives. He even started a college fund before the babies were born. Everything was perfect, controlled, predictable. But pregnancies, especially high-risk multiple births, don't follow business plans. By her 7th month, Olivia was experiencing complications that had their high-end obstetrician concerned. Preeclampsia, unusual bleeding, signs that the babies might need to be delivered early. Their doctor recommended immediate hospitalization, but the private hospital Theodore preferred was full. There's another option, the doctor said carefully. There's a midwife clinic on the south side that specializes in high-risk multiple births. Marissa Keene runs it. She's unconventional, but she's saved more complicated pregnancies than anyone in the state. Theodore's first instinct was to fly Olivia to another city, find another private hospital. But time was running out, and Olivia was scared. "If she's the best," Olivia whispered, gripping Theodore's hand, "then that's where we need to go." Have you ever been in a situation where pride had to take a back seat to what was right for someone you loved? Tell me in the comments about a time when circumstances forced you to step outside your comfort zone for family. Because what Theodore was about to experience would challenge every assumption he had about the world and about himself. 15 miles south of Theodore's corporate tower, in a neighborhood where corner stores sold phone cards and families gathered on front porches after dinner, Marissa Keene was finishing her shift at the clinic she had helped establish 5 years earlier. Marissa's path to midwifery hadn't been traditional. She had started as a registered nurse at Grady Hospital, but quickly became frustrated with an overburdened system that treated birth like a medical emergency instead of a natural miracle. Too many mothers, especially black mothers, were dying in childbirth, Too many babies were being lost to complications that proper care could prevent. So Marissa had gone back to school, earned her certified nurse midwife credentials, and opened a practice that focused on what hospitals often overlooked: treating each mother as a whole person, not just a collection of symptoms. Her clinic occupied a converted house on Auburn Avenue, not far from the historic district where Dr. King had preached. The waiting room walls were covered with photos of the hundreds of babies Marissa had delivered, and thank you letters from mothers who credited her with saving their lives. Marissa's own story was woven through those testimonials. She had grown up 3 blocks away, raised by her grandmother after her mother died young from complications that Marissa now knew were preventable. Every baby she delivered was a small victory against the systemic inequalities that had shaped her childhood. She was known throughout the community not just for her medical skills, but for her fierce advocacy. When insurance companies tried to deny coverage, Marissa fought them. When hospitals refused to accept her transfers, she made phone calls until doors opened. When mothers couldn't afford care, she found ways to make it work. But Marissa had never delivered a baby for a white millionaire. She had never been thrust into the middle of a family crisis that would force her to choose between professional protocol and moral courage. On that humid July morning, when Theodore's Mercedes pulled up outside her clinic, followed by an ambulance carrying a frightened Olivia in active labor, 2 worlds that had existed in parallel were about to collide. Theodore stepped out of his car wearing a $1,000 suit and the expression of a man accustomed to controlling every variable. Marissa met them at the door in scrubs that had seen countless deliveries, her face calm with the confidence that comes from bringing new life into the world under the most challenging circumstances. Neither of them could have predicted what was about to happen. Neither of them could have imagined that in a few short hours, a moment of biological truth would force them both to confront everything they thought they knew about family, race, and what it means to do the right thing when the whole world is watching. Because when those triplets came into the world, healthy and perfect and undeniably biracial, they didn't just enter a delivery room. They entered a storm of confusion, fear, and prejudice that would test everyone present in ways they never expected. What happened next would change 5 lives forever. And it would start with a question that no one in that room was prepared to answer. How you handle a miracle that challenges everything you thought you believed. July 15, 2001, 5:47 a.m. The delivery room at Marissa's clinic was bathed in the soft morning light, filtering through windows that had witnessed hundreds of births, but none quite like this one. Olivia Bainbridge gripped the bed rails, her knuckles white against the pale blue sheets. Contractions were coming fast now, too fast for a first-time mother carrying triplets. Theodore paced near the window, his perfectly pressed shirt now wrinkled, his usual commanding presence reduced to the helpless anxiety every expectant father knows. Marissa moved through the room with practiced calm, checking monitors, adjusting Olivia's position, speaking in the gentle but authoritative voice that had guided so many women through this profound moment. Her assistant, a young nurse named Patricia, prepared the warming beds where 3 babies would soon take their first breaths. "How are we doing, Mrs. Bainbridge?" Marissa asked, her hand steady as she examined Olivia. "Scared," Olivia whispered, tears mixing with perspiration on her cheeks. "What if something goes wrong? We've waited so long for this." Theodore moved to his wife's side, taking her hand. For all his faults, and there were many, his love for Olivia was genuine. "Nothing's going wrong," he said softly. "We're going to meet our children today." Our children. The words hung in the air like a promise that would soon be shattered. At 6:23 a.m., Jalen entered the world with a strong cry that filled the delivery room with relief and joy. Marissa lifted him carefully, her experienced eyes immediately taking in every detail. 10 fingers, 10 toes, strong lungs, healthy color. But as she cleaned the amniotic fluid away and the baby's features became clear, Marissa's heart skipped a beat. The child's skin tone, the shape of his eyes, the texture of his hair. This was a biracial baby. Beautiful, perfect, and undeniably of mixed heritage. Marissa glanced at Theodore, who was focused entirely on Olivia, coaching her through the next contraction. He hadn't seen the baby clearly yet. None of them had processed what was becoming obvious to Marissa's trained eye. "First baby is here and healthy," she announced, wrapping Jalen quickly and placing him in Patricia's arms. 2 more to go, Amara arrived 12 minutes later, smaller than her brother, but equally vocal about her entrance into the world. As Marissa held her, the truth became undeniable. Another biracial child, with the same distinctive features as her brother. Theodore had moved closer now, trying to catch a glimpse of his daughters being cleaned and checked. "Are they okay?" he kept asking. "Can I see them?" "Give us just a moment, Mr. Bainbridge," Marissa said, her voice steady despite the storm building in her chest. She caught Patricia's eye and saw her own recognition reflected there. Patricia, who had been assisting in deliveries for 15 years, understood exactly what was happening. Nia completed the trio at 6:41 a.m., the smallest of three, but with the strongest grip when she wrapped her tiny fingers around Marissa's thumb. 3 healthy babies. 3 beautiful children. 3 lives that were about to change everything their parents thought they knew about their family. "Mr. and Mrs. Bainbridge," Marissa said, her voice carrying the weight of what she was about to reveal. "I'd like to introduce you to your children." She approached the bed carrying Jalen, with Patricia following with the girls. Theodore reached out eagerly, his face lighting up with the joy every new father feels. But as Marissa placed Jalen in his arms, as Theodore got his first clear look at his son, the joy drained from his face like water from a broken dam. The room fell silent, except for the soft sound of the babies and the steady beep of monitors. Theodore stared at Jalen, then at the girls Patricia was holding, then back at his son. His mouth opened and closed without sound, like a man drowning in his own confusion. I don't understand," Theodore whispered, his voice barely audible. Olivia, exhausted from delivery but alert enough to sense the sudden tension, struggled to sit up. "What's wrong?" "Theodore, what's wrong with our babies?" "Nothing is wrong with your babies," Marissa said firmly, her professional instincts kicking in. "They are healthy, perfect children. All of them." But Theodore was backing away now, still holding Jalen, but looking at him like he was holding a stranger's child. These can't be. Let me stop right here for a moment. What you're witnessing is one of those moments that reveals who someone really is when everything they thought they knew gets turned upside down. Have you ever had a moment where your true character was tested by circumstances you never expected? Because what Theodore does next will define not just his legacy, but the entire future of 3 innocent children. If you're feeling the tension right now, hit that like button, and let me know in the comments how you think you would handle discovering something this life-changing about your own family. "Theodore," Olivia called out, fear creeping into her voice. "Bring me my babies. I want to hold my babies." But Theodore was staring at Marissa now, his confusion hardening into something darker. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "My wife, we're both. This doesn't make sense." Marissa had seen shock before. She had delivered babies to teenage mothers, to women whose husbands were deployed overseas, to families facing unexpected challenges. But she had never seen a father reject his children at first sight because of their race. "Mr. Bainbridge," she said carefully, "genetics can be complicated. Sometimes traits skip generations, sometimes." "No." Theodore's voice cut through her explanation like a blade. "These aren't my children. They can't be my children." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Patricia gasped audibly. Olivia began to cry, not understanding what was happening, but sensing rejection in her husband's voice. And the babies, as if responding to the tension around them, began to fuss and cry. It took Olivia several more moments to understand. When Patricia gently placed Amara in her arms, when she looked down at her daughter's beautiful face and saw the same features that confused Theodore, the truth crashed over her like a wave. Her great-grandmother's face flashed through her memory. Stories her mother had whispered about family secrets, about a heritage that had been carefully hidden for generations. Olivia's own genealogy, which she had never questioned, suddenly became a mystery that explained everything. "Oh my God!" she breathed, looking up at Theodore with eyes full of fear and understanding. "Oh my God, Theodore, they're ours. They're really ours." But Theodore was already moving toward the door, his face a mass of panic and prejudice. "I need air. I need to think. I need to—" "You need to hold your children," Marissa said, her voice filled with authority that came from years of witnessing families in crisis. "Mr. Bainbridge, these babies need their father." Theodore stopped at the door, his hand on the handle, his back to his family. When he turned around, his face showed a man at war with himself. Love battling fear, joy wrestling with prejudice, the future fighting the past. "I can't," he whispered. I can't." What happened next would haunt everyone in that room for the rest of their lives. Theodore walked out, leaving his wife sobbing in a hospital bed, holding 3 beautiful babies who had just been abandoned by their father before they were an hour old. Marissa stood frozen for a moment, watching a family dissolve in real time. She had delivered over 1,000 babies in her career, but she had never witnessed anything like this. The magnitude of what Theodore had just done, the cruelty of it, the finality of it, left her speechless. Olivia's cries mixed with the baby's cries, creating a symphony of heartbreak that filled the small delivery room. Patricia moved quickly to help comfort the newborns while Marissa knelt beside Olivia's bed. "I'm so sorry," Olivia sobbed. "I'm so sorry this happened. I don't know how. I never knew." "You have nothing to apologize for," Marissa said softly, taking Olivia's hand. "You have 3 beautiful children who need their mother right now. That's all that matters." But even as she spoke the words, Marissa knew it wasn't true. Those babies needed more than just their mother. They needed protection from a world that might reject them the same way their father just had. They needed someone to fight for them when their own family wouldn't. They needed someone willing to risk everything to make sure they had a chance at the life they deserved. As Marissa looked at those 3 perfect babies, Jalen, Amara, and Nia, she made a decision that would change the course of all their lives. Because sometimes, when parents fail their children, it takes a village to step in and do what's right. And sometimes, that village starts with one person brave enough to act when everyone else is paralyzed by fear. The delivery room had settled into an uneasy quiet. Olivia dozed fitfully, emotionally and physically exhausted from both the birth and her husband's rejection. The triplets rested in their warming beds, unaware that their father had just walked out of their lives before they had even learned to focus their eyes. Marissa sat in the chair beside Olivia's bed, her mind racing through possibilities and consequences. In 37 years of life and 15 years of midwifery, she had never faced a moral crisis quite like this one. 3 innocent children, abandoned by their father, with a mother torn between love and social pressure. She had seen Theodore's type before. Men who claimed to be progressive until their own comfort zones were threatened. But she had never seen abandonment happen so swiftly, so completely, or with such devastating potential consequences. Patricia had gone home hours ago, but not before pulling Marissa aside. "What are you going to do?" she had whispered. "That man isn't coming back. And Mrs. Bainbridge, she's scared. I can see it in her eyes. She loves those babies, but she's terrified of what this means for her life." Marissa had no easy answers. She couldn't force Theodore to accept his children. She couldn't make Olivia strong enough to stand up to her husband's prejudice. But she could see the writing on the wall. These 3 beautiful babies were heading toward a future of rejection, confusion, and potential danger. In her neighborhood, Marissa had seen what happened to biracial children caught between worlds that didn't want them. She had witnessed the psychological damage that came from being denied by the very people who were supposed to love them unconditionally. She had held too many young mothers whose own mixed heritage children struggled with identity crises that stemmed from parental abandonment. At 11:30 that night, as Marissa finally prepared to leave the clinic, her phone rang. Olivia's voice was barely a whisper. "Marissa, can you come back? Please." When Marissa returned to the clinic, she found Olivia sitting in the rocking chair, holding all 3 babies at once, an awkward but determined embrace that spoke to her desperation to protect them. "Theodore came back," Olivia said without preamble. "He wants to take them to his mother's house in Savannah. He says his mother will know what to do with them." Marissa felt ice form in her stomach. She had heard about the Bainbridge family matriarch, Evelyn Bainbridge, a woman whose views on race and family purity were well known in certain Atlanta social circles. Sending these children to her would be like delivering lambs to wolves. "What do you want to do, Olivia?" Marissa asked gently. Olivia's tears started fresh. I want to keep them. I want to love them and raise them and protect them from all of this. But Theodore says if I don't agree to a solution, he'll leave me. He'll divorce me and make sure I get nothing. His lawyers are already drawing up papers that will claim the children aren't his. Marissa knelt beside the rocking chair, looking at the three sleeping faces that had no idea their futures hung in the balance. Jalen's tiny fist was wrapped around his mother's finger. Amara made soft sleeping sounds that reminded Marissa of her own niece. Nia's face was peaceful, trusting, completely innocent. There's another way, Marissa said quietly. Olivia looked up, hope and fear warring in her eyes. I have a friend. Her name is Angela Devereux. She runs a nonprofit organization that helps biracial children and their families navigate exactly these kinds of situations. She's helped place children in loving homes before when their birth families couldn't handle the complexity. You're talking about adoption, Olivia whispered. I'm talking about survival, Marissa replied gently but firmly. Olivia, if these babies go to Theodore's mother, what kind of life will they have? If you fight Theodore and lose everything, what can you provide for them? But if we can get them to Angela, they'll grow up knowing they're loved, knowing they're valuable, knowing their heritage is something to be proud of. What Marissa proposed wasn't just adoption, it was rescue, because she knew that Theodore wouldn't simply let this go. His reputation, his family standing, the potential scandal. He would find ways to control the narrative and possibly harm the children in the process. Angela has connections with family in Decatur, Marissa explained. Good people. Strong people who understand what these children will face growing up biracial in the South. They'll make sure Jalen, Amara, and Nia grow up knowing their worth. Olivia rocked slowly, tears streaming down her face. How would it work? Tonight, before Theodore comes back tomorrow, before lawyers get involved, before this becomes a legal battle that could drag on for years and traumatize these children. Marissa's voice carried the urgency of someone who understood that windows of opportunity in crises like this were measured in hours, not days. At 2 a.m., Angela Devereux arrived at the clinic in her reliable Honda Civic, a woman whose presence immediately filled the room with calm authority. At 45, Angela had devoted her life to supporting mixed-race families, biracial children, and the complex dynamics of racial identity in America. She had founded her nonprofit, Bridges of Understanding, after her own biracial daughter had struggled with rejection from both sides of her heritage. Angela understood better than most what these triplets would face, and she had built a network of families, counselors, educators, and advocates ready to support children exactly like them. These are Theodore Bainbridge's children? Angela asked after Marissa explained the situation. Biologically, yes, but he's already abandoned them. Legally, emotionally, completely. Angela approached the triplets' beds, studying each sleeping face with the expertise of someone who had helped dozens of children navigate similar circumstances. They're beautiful, and they're going to need every advantage we can give them. The handoff happened in the pre-dawn darkness of July 16th, 2001. Olivia held each baby one last time, whispering promises she hoped they would somehow remember. You are loved. You are wanted. You are going to do amazing things. Marissa watched as Angela secured the 3 carriers in her car, each baby sleeping peacefully, unaware that their lives had just taken a dramatic turn toward hope instead of heartbreak. Will I ever see them again? Olivia asked through her tears. That depends, Angela said gently, on whether you decide to be the mother they deserve or the wife Theodore wants you to be. But regardless of what you choose, these children will know they were born from love, even if they can't be raised in it. As Angela's taillights disappeared into the Atlanta dawn, Marissa stood with Olivia in the clinic parking lot, both women knowing they had just participated in something that would change multiple lives forever. What do I tell Theodore? Olivia whispered. You tell him the truth, Marissa replied, that his children are safe, that they're going to grow up knowing their worth, and that someday, when they're old enough and strong enough, they might come looking for answers about the father who walked away. Neither woman could have predicted that someday would come with such power, such success, and such undeniable proof that greatness can emerge in the most painful beginnings. Because while Theodore Bainbridge spent the next 23 years building his business empire, Jalen, Amara, and Nia Bainbridge were building something far more valuable. The strength, intelligence, and character that would eventually bring them face to face with the man who gave them life but refused to give them love. Their story was just beginning, and it would prove that sometimes the best parents are the ones who choose you, not the ones who create you. 2 years after that fateful July morning, the triplets had found something Theodore Bainbridge's wealth could never have provided: a home filled with unconditional love. Angela Devereux hadn't just found them a placement. She had connected them with Carmen and James Washington, a couple whose own journey through infertility had prepared them perfectly for 3 children who needed parents brave enough to love beyond biology. Carmen was a high school English teacher with a master's degree in African American literature. James worked as a mechanical engineer for the city of Atlanta while completing his evening law degree. Together, they represented everything Angela hoped for when she placed vulnerable children: education, stability, cultural pride, and hearts big enough to handle the complexities of raising biracial children in the American South. From the moment the triplets could understand language, Carmen made sure they knew their story. Not the painful parts, not yet, but the essential truth that would anchor their identity for life. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. Your heritage is a gift, not a burden. You come from strength on both sides, and that makes you powerful. The Washington home became a laboratory for identity formation. The bookshelves held works by James Baldwin alongside Jane Austen, Langston Hughes beside Shakespeare. The walls displayed African art next to family photos that showed the beautiful complexity of their blended family. Sunday dinners featured both cornbread and challah bread, both gospel music and classical compositions. James, despite working full-time and attending law school, never missed a bedtime story. His favorite ritual was what he called future talk, conversations where he'd ask each child what they wanted to accomplish when they grew up, then help them break down the steps to get there. Jalen wants to help people's brains work better. He'd tell Carmen after putting the children to bed, "That boy is going to be a doctor of some kind. Mark my words." By age 5, the triplets' distinct personalities were unmistakable, each channeling their early trauma into different strengths. Jalen was a questioner, the child who wanted to understand how everything worked. When other kids played with toys, Jalen took them apart to see the mechanics inside. When Carmen read stories, he interrupted with, "But why did that character make that choice?" His curiosity was insatiable, his memory remarkable, and his empathy profound. Even as a kindergartner, he gravitated toward helping classmates who struggled with learning, as if he instinctively understood what it felt like to need extra support. Amara was pure kinetic energy channeled into purpose. She ran everywhere, climbed everything, and competed in every playground game with fierce determination. But her athleticism came with unusual emotional intelligence. She was a child who noticed when others felt left out, who made sure every kid got picked for teams, who turned competition into inclusion. Amara doesn't just want to win, Carmen observed. She wants everyone to know they can win too. Nia was the artist and the observer, the child who saw beauty in broken things and found ways to make them whole again. She drew constantly, painted on any surface she could find, and created elaborate stories for her stuffed animals that usually involved characters finding their way home after being lost. Her art teacher would later say that Nia painted emotions instead of objects, capturing feelings that most adults couldn't articulate. As the children grew older, the questions became more complex. Carmen and James had prepared for this, working closely with Angela and child psychologists to handle the inevitable curiosity about their origins. Why didn't our birth parents want us? Became the central question around age 8, asked in different ways by each child. Carmen's approach was always honest but age-appropriate. Sometimes adults make decisions based on fear instead of love. That doesn't mean you weren't worthy of love. It means they weren't ready to be the parents you deserved. But every ending can become a new beginning if you let it. James added the practical perspective. Your birth father's loss became our greatest blessing. His inability to love you completely opened the door for us to love you the way you deserve. The triplets seemed to understand intuitively that their success would be their strongest response to rejection. They threw themselves into academics with intensity that amazed their teachers and sometimes worried Carmen and James. Jalen devoured science books like other kids read comic books. By fourth grade, he was reading high school biology textbooks. By middle school, he was corresponding with professors at Emory University about brain research. His science fair projects weren't just impressive for his age. They were impressive, period. Amara approached athletics the same way Jalen approached academics, with scientific precision and relentless dedication. She studied nutrition, analyzed her training data, and approached each sport like a research project. Track, basketball, soccer, she excelled at everything, but more importantly, she used her platform to advocate for equal opportunities for girls and minorities in sports. Nia's artistic development was equally remarkable. Her paintings and sculptures began winning regional competitions in middle school. But beyond technical skill, her work carried emotional depth that spoke to audiences across racial and cultural lines. A piece she created at age 12, a sculpture of 3 trees growing from shared roots but reaching toward different skies, sold at a charity auction for more than some adult artists commanded. If you've ever felt like you had to prove your worth because someone important didn't see your value, you understand what these 3 children were experiencing. They were using excellence as armor and achievement as validation. Have you ever channeled pain into purpose the way Jalen, Amara, and Nia were doing? Let me know in the comments, because what happens next shows just how powerful that transformation can be. And if the story is resonating with you, make sure you hit that subscribe button. We're just getting the part where their strength really gets tested. By high school, the triplets had become local celebrities in their own right. Jalen was valedictorian while conducting original research on traumatic brain injury. Amara held multiple state records in track and field while organizing community programs that brought athletic opportunities to underserved neighborhoods. Nia's art was being shown in galleries, with pieces that explored identity, belonging, and the beauty of being in between. But success couldn't fill the void left by unanswered questions about their father. The conversations became more frequent, more intense, and more focused on action rather than speculation. "I keep thinking," Jalen said one evening as the 3 sat in the backyard that had witnessed countless conversations about their origins. What kind of man could look at 3 healthy babies and just walk away? Maybe he was scared. Nia offered, always the one to seek understanding over judgment. Maybe he didn't know how to handle something that complicated. Amara, characteristically direct, shook her head. Fear doesn't excuse abandonment. If we can figure out who he is, maybe we can understand what happened. Not for him, for us. Angela had always promised that when they turned 18, she would share everything she knew about their origins. But as high school graduation approached, the triplets made a collective decision. They didn't want to wait. Carmen and James supported their desire to learn the truth, understanding that identity questions don't follow neat timelines. Working with Angela, they began the process of uncovering the story that had been carefully protected for 17 years. The revelation that their father was Theodore Bainbridge, the Theodore Bainbridge whose company they had studied in business classes, whose philanthropic work they had read about in newspapers, hit them like a physical blow. "He's been 15 miles away this whole time," Amara said, staring at a newspaper photo of Theodore accepting an award for educational philanthropy, giving money to help other people's children while pretending we don't exist. Jalen's response was quieter but more analytical. "Look at what his company does. Medical technology, brain research funding. He's supporting the exact kind of work I want to do. The irony is that his abandoned son is going to revolutionize the field he's trying to support," Nia finished. The decision to approach Theodore wasn't made impulsively. The triplets spent months researching him, studying his public appearances, understanding his business and philanthropic activities. They weren't planning revenge. They were planning revelation. "We're going to show him what he missed," Jalen declared. Not to hurt him, but to make him understand the magnitude of his choice. Amara added her athlete's competitive edge. "We're going to prove that his rejection made us stronger, not weaker." Nia, ever the artist, saw it differently. "We're going to complete the story. Every narrative needs resolution, and we're the resolution he's been avoiding for 18 years. As graduation approached and college acceptances arrived, Jalen to Emory for neuroscience, Amara to Stanford on a full athletic scholarship, Nia to SCAD with a prestigious art fellowship. The triplets realized their confrontation with Theodore would happen from a position of undeniable strength. They weren't broken children seeking validation from an absent father. They were accomplished young adults ready to face the man whose rejection had become the foundation of their resilience. Carmen watched her children prepare for this meeting with a mixture of pride and protective fear. "Remember," she told them, "you're not going to him as supplicants. You're going as the incredible people you become despite his abandonment. He needs to see you more than you need to see him." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Theodore's company regularly sponsored charity events focused on education and racial reconciliation, the kind of causes that helped to maintain his progressive public image while avoiding the personal reckonings that real growth requires. The next such event would be their stage. 3 accomplished young adults, ready to introduce themselves to the father who had denied their existence, carried with them 18 years of strength built from the ashes of his rejection. They had grown up in the shadows of his denial, but they were about to step into the light. Not as victims, but as victors in a battle he didn't even know he had lost. Because while Theodore Bainbridge had spent 18 years building a business empire and a carefully crafted public image, Jalen, Amara, and Nia had built something far more powerful. Unshakable identities rooted in love, purpose, and the kind of strength that only comes from overcoming abandonment through excellence. The father who had walked away from 3 helpless babies was about to meet 3 extraordinary adults who had transformed his rejection into their greatest strength. 18 years after walking out of that delivery room, Theodore Bainbridge sat behind a mahogany desk worth more than most people's annual salaries, reviewing quarterly reports that showed Bainbridge Technologies had just crossed the $3 billion revenue threshold. Forbes had called him the visionary CEO who revolutionized healthcare data. Ted had invited him to speak about innovation and leadership. The governor of Georgia had him on speed dial. By every external measure, Theodore Bainbridge was a spectacular success. So why did he feel like a fraud? The numbers were undeniable. Bainbridge Technologies now employed over 15,000 people across 12 countries. Their software systems manage medical records for 60% of American hospitals. The company's innovations had literally saved lives, streamlining emergency response times and reducing medical errors through better data management. Theodore's personal wealth had grown beyond his wildest early projections. The Buckhead mansion had been replaced by a 20,000-square-foot estate in Sandy Springs. He owned homes in Aspen, Martha's Vineyard, and a penthouse in Manhattan. His art collection was valued at over $50 million. His wine cellar contained bottles that sommeliers discussed in reverent whispers. Yet every morning when he looked in the mirror, Theodore saw a man haunted by a choice he couldn't undo. Olivia had tried to stay. For 3 years after that July morning, she had played the role of the perfect CEO's wife, attending charity galas, hosting dinner parties, smiling for society photographers. But the triplets' absence was a ghost that haunted their marriage, a silence that grew louder with each passing month. The divorce had been quiet, expensive, and final. Olivia had signed non-disclosure agreements that ensured their family secret would remain buried, but she had also disappeared from Atlanta entirely, moving to Europe where she could start over without the constant reminder of the children she had given birth to but never raised. Theodore had remarried within 2 years, a strategic union with Victoria Ashford, daughter of a prominent banking family. Victoria was beautiful, accomplished, and had no interest in children, which suited Theodore's psychological need to avoid any situation that might force him to confront his capacity for fatherhood. Their marriage was successful by society's standards, elegant, profitable, and completely devoid of the emotional vulnerability that might have led to genuine intimacy or personal growth. Despite his wealth and status, Theodore's nights were often sleepless marathons of regret and rationalization. He would lie awake in his custom-made bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying that morning in the delivery room with painful clarity. He remembered Jalen's tiny fingers wrapping around his thumb. He remembered the soft sounds Amara made as she slept. He remembered the way Nia had looked at him with those newborn eyes that seemed to see straight through his soul. 3 children. His children. Gone. The rational part of his mind had spent 18 years justifying his decision. He had told himself that those babies would be better off without the scandal, without the complications, without the social pressures they would have faced in his world. He had convinced himself that walking away was actually a form of protection, a sacrifice he was making for their benefit. But at 3 a.m., when success couldn't silence conscience, Theodore knew the truth. He had abandoned his children because his prejudice had been stronger than his love. Perhaps it was guilt, or perhaps it was a subconscious attempt to balance the cosmic scales. But Theodore had become increasingly involved in educational philanthropy. The Bainbridge Foundation, established 5 years after the divorce, had donated over $100 million to schools, scholarships, and programs supporting underserved children. He particularly favored initiatives that helped biracial and minority students access higher education. His donations had funded science labs, athletic programs, and art studios in schools across Georgia. He had personally funded full scholarships for dozens of students who might otherwise never have had opportunities for college. The irony wasn't lost on him during his more honest moments. He was helping other people's abandoned or struggling children, while his own biological children remained lost to him by his own choice. At charity events, when young people approached to thank him for changing their lives, Theodore felt a complex mixture of pride and emptiness. He was making a difference, yes, but it felt like trying to fill an ocean with a teaspoon. Bainbridge Technologies continued to innovate and expand. Their latest breakthrough, an AI system that could predict medical emergencies hours before they occurred, was being hailed as revolutionary. Theodore had been invited to present the technology at medical conferences around the world. But even professional triumph felt hollow. Every medical conference reminded him of his abandoned children, particularly when he saw young researchers making presentations. He found himself wondering, could one of them be Jalen? Would his son have been interested in medical technology? Would he have been proud of his father's work or disgusted by his personal failures? The questions tortured him because they had no answers. He had made sure of that 18 years ago. Theodore's public persona had become increasingly focused on themes of redemption, second chances, and the importance of supporting children who face difficult circumstances. His speeches at charity events often emphasized the potential that existed in every child, regardless of their background or family situation. Every child deserves someone who believes in their potential, he would tell audiences, the words carrying a weight that most listeners attributed to passionate philanthropy rather than personal regret. We never know what remarkable achievements are possible when we provide love, support, and opportunity to young people who might otherwise be overlooked or abandoned. The standing ovations that followed these speeches felt like mockery to Theodore. He was being celebrated for wisdom that came from failure, for compassion that had arrived too late to matter where it was needed most. Despite his material success, Theodore's personal life remained carefully controlled and emotionally distant. He had learned to compartmentalize his guilt, to function at a high level professionally while carrying the constant weight of his abandoned children. He threw himself into work with increasing intensity, as if building a bigger empire might somehow retroactively justify his personal failures. Board meetings, acquisition strategies, international expansion, anything to keep his mind occupied and away from the questions that had no acceptable answers. But success has a way of amplifying emptiness rather than filling it. The bigger his achievements, the more obvious it became that something fundamental was missing from his life. As 2019 progressed, Theodore found himself increasingly drawn to events and activities that might bring him into contact with young adults who could be his children. He attended university graduations, art exhibitions, athletic competitions, always wondering, always searching faces in crowds, always hoping and dreading in equal measure. He had no idea that 3 remarkable young people were preparing to end his 18 years of wondering. He couldn't have imagined that his abandoned children had not only survived his rejection, but had transformed it into the foundation of extraordinary lives. Theodore Bainbridge was about to discover that success built on the bones of abandoned family is no success at all. And he was going to learn this lesson from the 3 people who had the greatest right to teach it to him. Because while Theodore had spent 18 years running from the consequences of his choice, Jalen, Amara, and Nia had spent those same years preparing to show him exactly what those consequences looked like when they grew up to become everything he never imagined possible. The hollow king of a tech empire was about to meet the royal heirs he had refused to claim. The conference room buzzed with the energy of breakthrough science. Dr. Jalen Washington, he had legally changed his surname to honor his adoptive parents, while keeping Bainbridge as a middle name, stood at the podium, his PowerPoint presentation displaying brain scans that represented 3 years of revolutionary research. At 23, Jalen was the youngest presenter at the International Conference on Traumatic Brain Injury Recovery. His research on neuroplasticity and memory restoration had already attracted attention from Johns Hopkins, Harvard, and the Mayo Clinic. But today, something unexpected would happen that had nothing to do with neuroscience and everything to do with destiny. Traditional approaches to brain injury rehabilitation focus on compensating for lost function. Jalen explained to the audience of distinguished neurologists, researchers, and medical technology executives. But what if we've been thinking about this backwards? What if the brain's capacity for healing is far greater than we've understood? His presentation detailed breakthrough research using targeted electromagnetic stimulation combined with cognitive therapy to actually restore damaged neural pathways. The results were unprecedented. Patients who had been written off as permanently disabled were recovering functions that medical science had declared impossible. The audience was captivated, but none more so than the journalist sitting in the back row. Marcus Chun from Atlanta Medical Journal had been assigned to cover the conference's breakout sessions, but Jalen's presentation had caught his attention for reasons beyond just scientific merit. After the presentation, as Jalen fielded questions from impressed colleagues, Marcus approached with his recorder and notepad. "Dr. Washington, your research is groundbreaking," Marcus began. "But I have to ask, and forgive me if this seems off topic, but you go by Washington, yet your middle name is Bainbridge. Any relation to Theodore Bainbridge of Bainbridge Technologies? His company has funded several brain research initiatives." Jalen's composure never wavered, but something flickered in his eyes. "That's complicated," he said diplomatically. "Why do you ask?" "Well, Bainbridge Technologies just announced a $50 million initiative to fund exactly the kind of research you're doing. The irony would be remarkable if Theodore Bainbridge's own son was pioneering the field his company is supporting." Marcus had meant it as casual conversation, the kind of coincidental connection journalists notice. He had no idea he had just lit a fuse that would burn for months. That evening, Jalen called his sisters with news that would change everything. "I think someone's starting to connect the dots." Amara was in Palo Alto, having just finished her junior year at Stanford, where she was breaking records on the track while double majoring in sports medicine and social justice. Her latest achievement, organizing a conference on racial equity in collegiate athletics, had attracted national media attention. Nia was in Savannah, completing her senior thesis at SCAD. Her art installation, Invisible Fathers, a series of sculptures representing the psychological landscapes of abandoned children, was scheduled to debut at a major Atlanta gallery in 6 months. The three gathered via video call in what had become their regular family council format, a practice they'd maintained since middle school for making important decisions together. "The question is," Amara said, her athlete strategic mind already working, "do we want to be discovered, or do we want to control how this story comes out?" Nia, ever the artist, saw it differently. "Maybe the universe is telling us it's time. We spent years building ourselves into people he couldn't deny or dismiss. Maybe now is when we complete the story." Jalen, the scientist, wanted data. "We need to know everything about him first. His current situation, his business, his philanthropy, his personal life. If we're going to confront him, we need to understand exactly who we're confronting." What followed was a masterclass in modern investigation. The triplets used every resource available to their generation: social media analysis, public record searches, news archives, and professional networking platforms. They discovered Theodore's divorce from their birth mother, his remarriage to Victoria Ashford, his childless second marriage that had lasted 15 years. They found records of his philanthropic giving, his board memberships, his public speeches about supporting disadvantaged children. The irony was overwhelming and infuriating in equal measure. "Listen to this," Amara said during one of their research sessions, reading from a transcript of Theodore's speech at a charity gala. He says, "Every child deserves someone who believes in their potential, regardless of their background or family circumstances." He said this while presenting a check for $1 million to support scholarship programs for minority students. Nia's artistic sensibility found the psychological complexity fascinating. He's been trying to parent other people's children as penance for abandoning us. It's like he's been living in a twisted form of grief for 18 years. Jalen's analytical mind focused on the business angle. His company has donated over $10 million specifically to brain injury research in the past 5 years. My research. He's been indirectly funding the work of the son he abandoned without even knowing it. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, LinkedIn. Nia had been researching Theodore's professional connections when she noticed something interesting in his company's press releases. Bainbridge Technologies was scheduled to sponsor a major charity gala in September, Bridges to Understanding, a night of racial reconciliation and educational opportunity. The event would benefit programs supporting biracial children and families navigating identity challenges. "You're not going to believe this," Nia told her siblings during their next call. "The charity this gala is supporting? It's Angela's organization. He's going to be giving money to the woman who saved us from him." The cosmic irony was almost too much to process. Theodore would be publicly celebrating the very organization that had rescued his children from the consequences of his rejection. The decision crystallized quickly. The charity gala would be their stage, not for revenge, but for revelation, not to destroy him, but to show him the full magnitude of what his choice had cost and what it had created. We walk in as the success stories his donations are supposed to create. Jalen explained their strategy. We show him that the abandoned children he's been trying to save through charity work are standing right in front of him. Amara added her competitive perspective. We don't go as victims seeking acknowledgement. We go as victors showing him what he lost. Nia saw it as artistic completion. Every story needs an ending. We're going to give him, and us, the ending the story deserves. As summer turned to fall, the triplets prepared for what they knew would be the most important night of their lives. They coordinated their schedules, ensuring all three would be in Atlanta for the gala. They rehearsed their approach, planning what they would say and how they would handle Theodore's reaction. Angela, now in her 50s and still running Bridges to Understanding, was briefed on their plan. Her reaction was a mixture of pride and protective concern. "You've grown into remarkable adults," she told them during a private dinner. "But confronting him won't give you what you think it will. He can't retroactively become the father you deserved. He can't undo 18 years of absence." "We know," Jalen replied. "We're not looking for a father. We're looking for a closure." And maybe, Amara added, "we're giving him a chance at redemption he doesn't deserve but might need." Nia, always the one to see deeper meanings, had the final word. "We're not just confronting him. We're showing the world what happens when love triumphs over abandonment, when chosen family proves stronger than biological rejection." As September approached, Theodore Bainbridge prepared for another charity gala, another opportunity to write checks that might ease the guilt he carried. He had no idea that the three most important people in his life were preparing to walk through those doors. He couldn't have imagined that his philanthropic work supporting abandoned and biracial children was about to come face to face with the abandoned biracial children whose lives he had shaped through absence rather than presence. The man who had spent 18 years running from the consequences of his prejudice was about to meet the living proof that greatness can emerge from the most painful beginnings. Because on a warm September evening in Atlanta, three remarkable young adults would walk into a charity gala carrying 18 years of unanswered questions, undeniable achievements, and a kind of quiet strength that comes from transforming abandonment into purpose. Their father was about to learn that the children he had thrown away had grown up to become everything he had never dared to hope for, and everything he was about to realize he had lost. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across Atlanta's social and business elite as they mingled in support of Bridges to Understanding, a night of racial reconciliation and educational opportunity. The ballroom hummed with conversations about progress, philanthropy, and the power of second chances, themes that would prove devastatingly prophetic as the evening unfolded. Theodore Bainbridge stood near the silent auction display, champagne glass in hand, discussing healthcare technology innovations with the CEO of Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. At 57, he cut an impressive figure in his custom tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled, his smile practiced from decades of high-stakes social interactions. He had no idea that across the ballroom, three young people were studying his every movement, preparing for a conversation 18 years in the making. Jalen entered first, having driven down from Emory where he was completing his postdoctoral research. At 23, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone whose intellectual achievements spoke louder than any introduction. His tuxedo was rented, but his presence was unmistakably powerful. Amara arrived minutes later, having flown in from Stanford specifically for this moment. Her athletic build and graceful movement turned heads as she crossed the ballroom, but her focus was laser-sharp on the man who had shaped her life through his absence. Nia completed the trio, her artistic eye immediately cataloging every detail of the scene she was about to transform. She had driven up from Savannah that afternoon, her heart heavy with the weight of 18 years of unanswered questions finally approaching resolution. They met near the entrance, three siblings who had never stopped being family despite being abandoned before they could walk. "Are we ready for this?" Amara asked, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "We've been ready for 18 years, Jalen replied. "Nia," Eva the artist added, "let's go complete our story." Angela Devereux, now 55 and a guest of honor for her decades of work supporting biracial families, spotted them immediately. The woman who had saved 3 babies from abandonment watched as those same babies, now accomplished adults, prepared to face the man who had thrown them away. She approached them with the protective instinct that had never left her. "You don't have to do this tonight," she whispered. "There will be other opportunities, other ways to—" "Angela," Jalen interrupted gently, "you gave us life by giving us love. Now, let us choose how to use that life." Across the ballroom, Theodore was oblivious to the approaching reckoning. He was in his element, discussing a $50 million donation to pediatric brain injury research, accepting congratulations on his company's latest acquisition, playing the role of the visionary philanthropist with practiced ease. The first person to recognize what was happening was actually Victoria, Theodore's wife. Her sharp social instincts, honed by decades of high society navigation, immediately picked up on the unusual energy as 3 young people moved purposefully through the crowd toward her husband. "Theodore," she murmured, touching his arm. "I think someone wants to speak with you." Theodore turned, following his wife's gaze, and found himself looking at 3 of the most striking young people in the room. There was something familiar about them, something that made his breath catch in his throat without understanding why. The young man in the center was tall, with intelligent eyes and a presence that commanded attention. The woman to his left had an athlete's bearing, and the kind of quiet intensity that spoke to serious purpose. The woman to his right carried herself with an artist's grace, her gaze direct and unflinching. As they approached, Theodore felt a strange sense of recognition that he couldn't place, like trying to remember a dream that stayed just beyond conscious recall. "Mr. Bainbridge," Jalen said, his voice calm and professional. "My name is Dr. Jalen Bainbridge Washington. These are my sisters, Amara Bainbridge Washington and Nia Bainbridge Washington. We were hoping we could have a word with you." The champagne glass slipped from Theodore's hand, hitting the marble floor with a crystal crash that seemed to echo through his soul. Around them, conversations paused as people turned to look at the commotion, but Theodore barely noticed. His world had narrowed to 3 faces that carried features he recognized from a delivery room 18 years ago. That's not possible," Theodore whispered, his commanding presence evaporating in seconds. "Actually," Amara said, her voice carrying the strength of someone who had spent 18 years preparing for this moment, "it's not only possible, it's inevitable. Did you really think 3 children could just disappear because you refused to acknowledge them?" Victoria, reading the situation with razor-sharp social intelligence, immediately moved to manage the scene. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private," she suggested, already guiding the group toward a smaller reception room off the main ballroom. As they moved through the crowd, Theodore walked like a man in a dream or a nightmare. The faces of the 3 young people kept overlapping with his memories of 3 tiny babies he had last seen in a delivery room that felt like a lifetime ago. Angela watched from across the room, her heart breaking and soaring simultaneously as she witnessed the confrontation she had both dreaded and hoped for since the day she had first held those abandoned babies. In the quiet of the smaller room, with the ballroom's noise muffled by heavy doors, the full weight of 18 years crashed down on Theodore. He stood facing three extraordinary young people who shared his DNA, but had been shaped by his absence. You're really... He started, then stopped, unable to complete the sentence. Your children? Nia finished. Yes, the three babies you walked away from on July 15th, 2001. The children you decided weren't worth claiming, because our skin color challenged your comfort zone. Theodore sank into a chair, the color draining from his face. How did you? Where have you been? Who raised you? Angela Devereux raised us, Jalen said, his scientific mind providing facts even in this emotionally charged moment. The woman you're honoring tonight for her work with abandoned biracial children? She's the one who made sure we survived your rejection. The irony hit Theodore like a physical blow. He had been celebrating and funding the very woman who had saved his children from him. And before you ask, Amar continued, yes, we know about your philanthropy. We know about your donations to support abandoned children, your speeches about giving every child a chance, your charitable work with families like ours. The question is, did you ever think about the three specific children you abandoned while you were saving everyone else? For the first time in 18 years, Theodore Bainbridge, CEO, Millionaire, Pillar of Society, completely broke down. Not the controlled emotion of a practiced public speaker, but the raw grief of a man confronting the full magnitude of his failures. Every day, he whispered, tears streaming down his face. Every single day, I thought about you. I wonder where you were, who you became, if you were safe, if you were loved. I told myself I did the right thing, that you were better off without me. But I never stopped. Never stopped what? Nia pressed, her artist's instinct for truth cutting through his attempt at self-justification. Never stopped regretting it, Theodore admitted. Never stopped knowing I was a coward. Never stopped wishing I could take it back. What happened next was not forgiveness. It was revelation. One by one, the triplets shared their achievements, not to wound Theodore, but to show him the full scope of what his abandonment had created through its absence. Jalen spoke about his breakthrough research in brain injury rehabilitation, his plans to revolutionize neurological treatment, his acceptance to Harvard's prestigious fellowship program. The son you threw away is about to change the field your company supports. Amara described her athletic records, her advocacy work, her upcoming graduation from Stanford with offers from Olympic training programs and graduate schools across the country. The daughter you didn't want is representing everything you claim to value about perseverance and achievement. Nia shared her artistic success, her upcoming gallery exhibitions, her acceptance to graduate programs in fine arts at Yale and Columbia. The other daughter you abandoned is creating art that helps people understand exactly the kind of identity struggles you force us to navigate. The room fell silent as the full weight of Theodore's loss settled over him. These weren't the broken, struggling children he might have imagined. These were accomplished, confident, remarkable young adults who had transformed his rejection into rocket fuel for their own success. You could have had all of this, Jalen said quietly. You could have been proud of us, supported us, watched us grow. Instead, you chose prejudice over love, fear over family. Theodore looked up at three faces that carried his features, but none of his failures. What do you want from me? He whispered. What can I possibly do to make up for what I took from you? From me? From all of us? Amara answered with a directness that had carried her through 18 years of channeling abandonment into achievement. We don't want anything from you that you should have given us 18 years ago. We wanted you to know that we exist, that we succeeded, that we became everything you never imagined possible. And Nia added with an artist's understanding of narrative resolution, we wanted you to understand that our greatness isn't despite your abandonment. It's because of what we built from the foundation of your rejection. As the conversation wound down, Theodore sat in stunned silence, processing 18 years of wondering compressed into one devastating hour of truth. His children, because they were undeniably his children, had not come seeking a father. They had come to show him what fatherhood could have been. Victoria, who had witnessed the entire exchange, looked at her husband with a mixture of pity and understanding. She was seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in their 15-year marriage. What happens now? Theodore asked, his voice barely audible. Now, Jalen replied, "You live with the truth, the same way we've lived with your absence." As the triplets prepared to return to the gala, leaving Theodore to process the wreckage of his carefully constructed worldview, none of them could have predicted what would happen next. Because sometimes when a man comes face to face with the full magnitude of his failures, he finds the courage to attempt something he should have done 18 years earlier. Take responsibility for the consequences of his choices. Theodore sat in his leather chair, surrounded by the monuments to his success, awards, newspaper clippings, photos with politicians and celebrities, but seeing only the faces of 3 young people which shattered his carefully constructed world with a few simple words. "We're your children." The past 72 hours had been the longest of his life. He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten properly, hadn't been able to focus on anything except the devastating realization that his greatest business achievements paled in comparison to the personal failure that had just walked back into his life. Victoria had tried to comfort him, to help him process what she called an impossible situation. But her efforts fell hollow to Theodore, who was finally understanding the difference between a marriage based on social compatibility and the kind of love that should have made him fight for his children instead of abandoning them. On that third sleepless night, Theodore made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He picked up his phone and called his lawyer, his publicist, and his board of directors. By morning, he would begin the most important project of his career, taking public responsibility for the greatest failure of his life. The first call went to Marcus Chun, the Atlanta Medical Journal reporter whose innocent question had started this entire chain of revelations. "Mr. Chun, this is Theodore Bainbridge. I believe you asked Dr. Jalen Washington about his connection to my family. I'd like to give you an exclusive interview that will answer that question completely." 2 weeks later, the front page of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution carried a headline that stunned the business and social communities. Tech CEO acknowledges 3 children he abandoned at birth. "My prejudice cost me everything that mattered." Theodore's statement was unflinching in its honesty. 18 years ago, when my wife gave birth to triplets who happened to be biracial, I made the worst decision of my life. I abandoned 3 healthy, beautiful children because my prejudice was stronger than my love. I have spent nearly 2 decades trying to atone for that choice through philanthropy and charitable work, but nothing can compensate for fundamental failure of walking away from my own children when they needed me most. The statement continued. Dr. Jalen Bainbridge Washington, Amara Bainbridge Washington, and Nia Bainbridge Washington are extraordinary young adults who have achieved remarkable success despite, or perhaps because of, my abandonment. They owe me nothing, but I owe them everything, an apology, an acknowledgement, and whatever support they will allow me to provide as they continue their incredible journeys. The response was immediate and polarizing. Some praised Theodore's courage in taking responsibility for his failures. Others questioned how someone could abandon children and then expect credit for eventually acknowledging them. The business community was divided. Several board members called for his resignation. Stock prices fluctuated wildly as investors tried to process whether this revelation would help or hurt the company's reputation. But Theodore had anticipated all of this. In board meetings, he was direct. "I'm not asking for forgiveness or praise. I'm taking responsibility. If the board feels this disqualifies me from leadership, I'll accept that consequence. But I won't pretend anymore that my professional success means anything if it's built on personal cowardice." The story resonated far beyond Atlanta's business circles. It became a national conversation about race, family, identity, and the possibility of redemption. Talk shows, podcasts, and news programs dissected every angle of the story. But the most significant responses came from unexpected sources. Other parents who had made similar choices, other abandoned children who saw their own stories reflected in the triplets' journey, and other families struggled with complexities of racial identity in America. Letters poured into Bainbridge Technologies from parents seeking advice on how to repair relationships with children they had rejected. Support groups formed around the country for biracial individuals navigating identity challenges. Angela's organization, Bridges to Understanding, saw a 1,000% increase in donations as the story highlighted the critical work they had been doing for decades. The triplets' reaction to Theodore's public acknowledgement was complex and deeply personal. They released their own statement through Angela's organization. We appreciate Theodore Bainbridge's public acknowledgement of our existence and his role in our story. His courage in taking responsibility is noted, but it doesn't erase 18 years of absence or the work we had to do to build our identities and achievements without him. We wish him well in his journey toward understanding the full impact of his choices, and we hope our story helps other families avoid similar tragedies. Privately, their reactions were more nuanced. Jalen told Angela, "I don't forgive him, but I understand him better now. His public statement wasn't for us. It was for him, and maybe that's what needed to happen." Amar was more direct. He finally did something right. It's 18 years late, but at least he stopped pretending we don't exist. Nia, with her artist perspective, saw deeper layers. He's not trying to be our father now. He's trying to become the man who could have been our father then. That's impossible, but maybe it's necessary for him to try. The public acknowledgement was only the beginning of Theodore's transformation. He restructured his charitable giving, focusing specifically on organizations that supported abandoned children, biracial identity development, and family reconciliation programs. More significantly, he began therapy, something he had avoided for decades despite multiple life crises. His therapist, Dr. Rachel Morrison, specialized in helping individuals confront deep-seated prejudices and the psychological costs of family estrangement. "You can't undo abandonment," Dr. Morrison told him during one of their early sessions, "but you can stop compounding it. The question is, what kind of man do you want to be for the rest of your life?" Theodore's leadership style at Bainbridge Technologies began to evolve dramatically. He instituted new policies supporting working parents, expanded diversity initiatives, and created mentorship programs specifically for young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. His marriage to Victoria, already strained by the revelation, began to fracture under the weight of his transformation. Victoria had married a successful, controlled man who avoided messy emotional complications. The man Theodore was becoming, vulnerable, seeking therapy, openly processing his failures, was someone she didn't recognize or particularly want to be married to. "You're becoming someone I don't know," Victoria told him during one of their increasingly tense conversations. "I'm becoming someone I should have been all along," Theodore replied. Theodore's journey wasn't a simple arc from villain to hero. His transformation was messy, painful, and incomplete. Some days he made progress. Others he struggled with the same prejudices and fears that had caused him to abandon his children. But he persisted, understanding that this work wasn't about earning forgiveness from his children. They owed him nothing. It was about becoming the kind of person who could live with himself, who could look in the mirror without seeing a coward. He attended conferences on racial reconciliation, not as a featured speaker, but as a participant. He supported research on the psychological impacts of parental abandonment. He funded scholarships specifically for biracial students pursuing careers in science, athletics, and the arts, fields where his children had excelled. The truest measure of Theodore's transformation came not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments. When another CEO confided his struggles with having a biracial grandchild, Theodore didn't offer easy platitudes. Instead, he shared his story honestly, including his failures, and connected the man with resources that might help. When Bainbridge Technologies was considering a merger with a company known for discriminatory practices, Theodore walked away from a billion-dollar deal rather than compromise the values he was working to develop. When reporters asked if he hoped to reconcile with his children, his answer was always the same. "My hope is that they continue to thrive and that someday, when they think of their father, they'll know he finally understood what he lost and why it mattered." 2 years after confrontation at the charity gala, Theodore had become a different man. Not perfect, not fully redeemed, but genuinely transformed by the process of confronting his deepest failures. The Triplets had continued their remarkable journeys. Jalen revolutionizing brain injury treatment, Amar competing at international levels while advocating for sports equity, Nia's art inspiring conversations about identity and belonging across the country. They remained connected to Angela and the Washington family, who had raised them with love. They had built lives of meaning and achievement that stood as monuments to resilience. The story that began with abandonment in a delivery room was approaching its resolution, but not in the way anyone might have expected. Because sometimes redemption isn't about getting back what you lost. It's about understanding why you lost it and making sure the damage stops with you. The man who had walked away from 3 babies was about to learn what it really means to be a father, even when fatherhood comes 18 years too late. 5 years have passed since 3 accomplished young adults walked into a charity gala and changed the trajectory of multiple lives forever. The story that began with abandonment in a delivery room has become something far more complex and meaningful than anyone could have predicted. Dr. Jalen Bainbridge Washington is now 32 and leading the most innovative brain injury rehabilitation program in the country at Johns Hopkins. His research has literally given thousands of patients their lives back, turning medical impossibilities into everyday miracles. When medical journals write about his work, they often note that his unique perspective on healing and recovery seems to come from someone who understands transformation on the deepest level. Amara Bainbridge Washington competed in 2 Olympic Games, winning silver in the 400-meter hurdles while using her platform to advocate for equity in sports funding and opportunities. She recently completed her MBA and started a foundation that brings athletic programs to underserved communities. Her motto, painted in her office, reads, "Every race is won by someone who refused to stay down." Nia Bainbridge Washington's art now hangs in the Smithsonian. Her series Found Families explores the beauty and complexity of chosen relationships, adoption, and the many ways people create home when traditional family structures fail them. Critics say her work captures the resilience of the human spirit in ways that speak across all cultural and racial boundaries. They remain close to Carmen and James Washington, the parents who chose to love them when their biological father chose to walk away. They visit Angela regularly, honoring the woman whose courage in that delivery room gave them the foundation for everything they achieved. Theodore Bainbridge, now 62, is no longer the CEO of Bainbridge Technologies. He stepped down 3 years ago to focus entirely on his foundation work and his ongoing personal transformation. His company thrived under new leadership, proving that his business success had always been about the people he hired rather than his individual genius. His second marriage to Victoria ended in divorce, not acrimoniously, but with the recognition that they had been compatible with versions of themselves that no longer existed. Theodore's therapy, his public vulnerability, and his commitment to confronting uncomfortable truths about himself had made him incompatible with a relationship built on avoiding difficult emotions. He has never remarried, but he has found peace and solitude and purpose in his work. The Bainbridge Foundation has become one of the most effective organizations in the country supporting family reunification, racial reconciliation, and programs for abandoned or displaced children. Perhaps the most surprising development came 2 years ago, when Jalen's research intersected with a medical emergency that would test everyone involved in ways no one anticipated. Angela suffered a severe stroke that left her with significant brain damage. The woman who had spent her life caring for others found herself in need of the kind of innovative treatment that only existed in a few places in the world. One of those places was Jalen's lab at Johns Hopkins. When Jalen called Theodore, the first direct contact between them since the charity gala confrontation, it wasn't as son or father. It was as doctor philanthropist, asking for funding to provide Angela with experimental treatment that insurance wouldn't cover. Theodore's response was immediate. "Whatever she needs, whatever it costs. She saved my children when I failed them. The least I can do is help save her." Angela's recovery became a symbol of the larger healing that had taken place in all their lives. The experimental treatment worked, restoring much of her cognitive function and mobility. But more significantly, her recovery brought the extended family of her choosing back together in ways that honored their complex relationships. Theodore visited Angela during her rehabilitation, not as the father of her former charges, but as someone grateful for her role in ensuring that 3 abandoned children became 3 extraordinary adults. Their conversations were careful, respectful, and free from expectations of forgiveness or relationship. "You don't get credit for doing what you should have done 18 years ago," Angela told him with characteristic directness. "But you get acknowledgement for doing what you're doing now." The story of Theodore and his children has become part of a larger national conversation about family, identity, prejudice, and the possibility of growth. Universities teach case studies based on their experiences. Support groups for abandoned children and estranged parents reference their journey as proof that healing is possible even when reunion isn't. Most importantly, their story has prevented other abandonments. Parents struggling with biracial children, families dealing with identity crises, and individuals confronting their own prejudices have found resources and support because of the foundation work that emerged from their painful beginning. The true lesson of this story isn't about forgiveness. The triplets never had to forgive Theodore, and their success never depended on his acknowledgement. The lesson is about the power of chosen love over biological obligation, the strength that can emerge from the deepest pain, and the importance of taking responsibility for our failures even when it's too late to undo them. Jalen, Amara, and Nia prove that greatness doesn't require perfect parents. It requires the courage to transform rejection into purpose, abandonment into strength, and questions into achievements that speak for themselves. Theodore proved that it's never too late to stop running from your failures and start working to ensure they don't continue to cause harm. Their story reminds us that families are built through love and commitment, not just biology. That success measured by character and contribution matters more than success measured by wealth and status. And that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is a space to become who they're meant to be, even when we're not worthy to be part of that journey. What resonated most with you about Jalen, Amara, and Nia's journey? Have you ever had to build strength from rejection or find family in unexpected places? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And remember to subscribe for more stories about the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to triumph over abandonment. Because every ending is really a beginning, and every story of healing inspires someone else to believe that their own transformation is possible. Next week, we'll explore another story of family identity and the courage it takes to choose love over fear. You won't want to miss it. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this extraordinary story here on Soul Igniting Story. I truly appreciate you for taking the time to be with us, to open your heart, and to let these words spark something within your soul. Every story we share is crafted to inspire, to uplift, and to remind us all that love, hope, and resilience are alive in every corner of the world. If this story touched you, made you smile, or even brought a little spark of wonder to your day, I would be so grateful if you could show your support. Please give this video a like. It helps more souls discover these stories. Don't forget to leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, feelings, or even your own experiences connected to the story. Your words make this community come alive. And of course, if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss the next beautiful journey we'll be sharing together. Until next time, thank you again for being part of the Soul Igniting Story family, where every story lights a flame within.